The Galactic Empire had catalogued 12,441 sentient civilizations. Of those, 12,437 had been conquered. The remaining 4 were classified as irrelevant, extinct, protected by treaty. And unresolved .it was the last category that troubled the Empire, because only one species had ever been placed inside it, and the Empire did not understand why. High Arbiter Zelva of the Imperial Strategic Council watched the blue sphere rotate slowly in the projection chamber. It was small, insignificant, orbiting a mid-range yellow star in a peripheral spiral arm. No strategic resources of note, no advanced stellar infrastructure, no galactic trade hubs, no military presence beyond its local system. Designation: Sort 3, native species. Human, technological classification: developing. Threat assessment: minimal. Empire action status: non-engagement directive level absolute. That last line had been entered 312 standard cycles ago. No explanation. No supporting documentation. Just a single authorization seal belonging to the late Emperor Carthel, conqueror of the Seven Arms and breaker of the Ark's dominion. Carthel had never issued unnecessary orders, and he had never feared anyone. Silver leaned forward, his crystalline tendrils flickering with controlled irritation. Archive. Intelligence, he said. A voice responded from the chamber's central core. Query. Acknowledged. Display justification for non-engagement. Directive. Human species. A pause, then no justification. Found. The arbiter froze. That is not possible. Directive was entered manually. Supporting records classified and deleted by Emperor Carthel. Authorization level absolute. The chamber fell silent. Across the Empire, billions of worlds burned in tribute to Imperial order. Fleets capable of extinguishing stars obeyed the Council's command, and yet one primitive species had been marked untouchable without explanation. Silva's tendrils tightened. This is unacceptable, he said quietly, and for the first time in 3 centuries, the Empire began looking toward Earth, far beyond Sol, on the frontier world of Tarsi's 4. Imperial Scout Commander Relk stood inside the observation tower, staring at the holographic feed. The humans did not look impressive. They were fragile, small, soft-skinned, no natural armor, no venom, no telepathic coordination. Their atmosphere was thin, their gravity moderate, their lifespan short. Relk had seen species that could tear apart armored vehicles with their bare limbs. Humans struggled to lift their own machinery without assistance. The Imperial briefing summarized them efficiently: emotionally unstable, politically fragmented, technologically inventive but inefficient, prone to internal conflict, highly adaptable but disorganized. Relk turned to his assistant. Remind me why this species has an absolute non-engagement classification. The assistant hesitated. There is no record, Commander. Relk stared back at the feed. Humans were broadcasting primitive electromagnetic entertainment across space. Stories, music, historical records, emotional dramas, wars, tragedies, victories. It was noisy. Relk increased magnification. The humans were fighting each other. Again, internal war, the assistant said. Nation-state conflict over resource control. Relk watched cities burn. Then he watched something unexpected. Human medical ships entered the conflict zone. Not to assist their own side. To assist everyone. Relk's crest flickered. Clarify. Human medical units have a cultural doctrine. Neutrality in humanitarian operations. They are treating enemy soldiers? Yes. Relk said nothing. In the Empire, mercy toward enemies was considered a strategic weakness. Among humans, it appeared routine. Relk lowered the feed. Continue observation, he said. But something in his tone had changed. The first real concern reached the Imperial Council 47 days later. It came from a deep space patrol vessel near the Sol system. The report was short, unauthorized. Contact attempt by independent raider. Fleet. Raider fleet strength 27 vessels. Objective: human resource extraction and population capture. Outcome: raider fleet destroyed. XCL. VAR read the report twice, then a third time. Destroyed by what? The intelligence officer hesitated. We are not certain. Were Imperial assets involved? No. Arbiter. Human military capability assessment indicates they cannot project force beyond their system. That is correct. Silver leaned forward. then what destroyed 27 warships? The officer activated the visual record, the chamber filled with darkness, stars, then the raider fleet approaching. Earth, weapons charging, shields activating, then the stars moved. No, not stars, objects, thousands of them. Old, silent, drifting, asteroids, derelict, satellites, fragments of long-dead machinery. Then, suddenly they activated. Energy surged across the debris field like lightning across a web. Every piece moved, every fragment aligned, every object accelerated. The raider fleet fired, the debris field didn't dodge. It collapsed inward, relativistic velocities. Impact, detonation, silence. 27 ships disappeared inside a storm of high-speed mass impacts and electromagnetic overload. The visual ended. The chamber was silent. Zelva spoke. Slowly, that was not human military doctrine. No, arbiter, that was automated. Yes, origin? The officer hesitated. Unknown. But analysis suggests the system has been in place for at least 100 human years. Zelva's crystalline formed in slightly humans, built a planetary-scale autonomous defense network. Yes, and never told anyone. Yes, the arbiter sat back. Interesting. 3 cycles later, a decision was made. Not invasion. Not yet, but observation. A diplomatic probe. Officially, first contact evaluation. Unofficially, find out what Emperor Carthel had seen. Ambassadorial vessel Harmony of Law departed for Sol. Its crew included linguists, cultural analysts, military observers, and one covert intelligence division. Commander Relk was assigned as military attaché before departure. He reviewed the directive. Primary objective, establish peaceful relations. Secondary objective, assess hidden military capability. Tertiary objective, determine reason for absolute non-engagement classification. Relk paused at the final line. If threat level exceeds expectations, withdraw immediately. Do not engage. The Empire never issued withdrawal instructions lightly. Relk looked at the image of Earth blue, peaceful, divided, primitive. He felt a strange sensation, uncertainty. The Harmony of Law entered the Sol system without resistance.no defense response.no. Challenge.no warning. Humans detected them, of course. Their communications lit up instantly. Confusion, excitement, fear, but no weapons fired. The diplomatic channel opened within minutes. A human appeared on the central screen, small, soft, wearing simple clothing. Her voice trembled slightly. This is the United Earth Coordination Council. We weren't sure if anyone was out there. Relk watched her eyes. Fear, hope, curiosity, hostility. The ambassador responded with imperial formality. We come in peace. Representatives of the Galactic Empire. The human exhaled visibly. That's good. That's really good. Relk studied her reaction, not the fear of a weak species facing a superior power, something else. Relief. The first meetings went smoothly. Humans were eager, talkative, transparent. They shared cultural archives, scientific data, historical records. Too much information. Too quickly. Relk noticed the pattern. They were not hiding. They were showing cities, art, music, medical advancements, environmental restoration, but also was genocides, near-extinction events, civilization collapses, nuclear annihilation narrowly avoided. Relk reviewed one historical segment 3 times. Why are they showing us this? He asked the cultural analyst. The analyst's voice was quiet. They want us to know what they've survived. On the 4th day, the ambassador requested access to Earth's orbital infrastructure. The humans agreed. Relk stood in the observation deck as the Harmony of Law approached Earth orbit. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Satellites, stations, traffic, civilian vessels. Then the scanner widened, and the display filled objects, millions of them, debris, fragments, dead satellites, scrap, orbiting in complex, precise patterns. Relk's crest rose slowly. This cannot be random. The systems officer ran analysis. The results appeared structured, layered, redundant. Global coverage, activation latency, less than 0.3 seconds. Relk's voice was very quiet. They weaponized their entire orbital environment. Later that day, the ambassador met the human Leadership in person. Relk attended. The meeting was polite, friendly, curious. Then the ambassador asked the question. The Galactic Empire has records indicating your species is restricted from military engagement. We would like to understand your defensive doctrine. The human leader, an older man with tired eyes, paused. Then he said something unexpected. We don't have a defensive doctrine. Relk frowned. The man continued. We have a survival doctrine. Silence filled the chamber. What is the difference? The ambassador asked. The human met his gaze. We don't prepare to and was the pause. We prepare to make them impossible to survive. Relk felt something cold move through his core. The human leaned back. We don't threaten anyone. We don't expand. We don't conquer. His voice dropped slightly. But if someone comes here to hurt our people. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. That night, in the secure intelligence channel, Relk sent a message to the Imperial Council. Human species is not militarily dominant. Human species is not technologically superior. Human species is not expansionist. Human species is not unified. But human species has one strategic trait. They assume they will lose every war.so they design their defenses to take the attacker with them. He hesitated, then added one final line. Recommend extreme caution. Back in the Imperial Core, High Arbiter Zelva received the report. He read it once. Then he opened the sealed archive of Emperor Carthel for the first time in 3 centuries. Inside was a single recording, the Emperor's final strategic note on humanity. Zelva activated it. The ancient ruler's voice filled the chamber. Do not conquer Earth. A pause. They are not dangerous because they are strong. Another pause. They are dangerous because they are afraid. The recording ended. Zelva stared at the blue planet rotating slowly before him, and for the first time, the Arbiter wondered what kind of species survives long enough to fear extinction. More than death. That question would be answered sooner than anyone expected, because at that very moment, beyond the outer edge of the Sol System, a fleet was approaching, not imperial, not human, and far larger than anything Earth had ever faced. The first warning came as a whisper in the static between stars, a faint compression of the heliopause, a distortion in the outer gravimetric nets that humans had once built for science and left running for paranoia. In the Sol System's farthest dark, where only comets drifted and sunlight became a memory, something massive pushed through the edge of human space like a knife sliding under skin on the Imperial vessel Harmony of Law. The sensor arrays caught it too. Their instruments were finer, older, tuned by civilizations that had charted 1,000 nebulae. The readings arrived in the tactical bay as a cold cascade of numbers and red flags. Commander Relk stood over the projection, crest half raised, tendrils quiet. The display showed a smear of contacts in the Kuiper belt, too many to synchronized. Too disciplined to be natural. The Imperial Systems officer didn't need to say the obvious. Fleet formation, Relk murmured. Not a migration. The human liaison in the room, Captain Mirar Vance, assigned to coordinate with the Empire's delegation, leaned forward, jaw tightening. How far out? She asked. The officer replied. Outer boundary. Past Pluto's old orbit. We're getting partial returns. They're masking. Relk glanced at her. Humans were famously expressive. Their faces betrayed thought before their mouths did. Mirar's eyes had shifted to a hard, distant focus that Relk had seen in archival footage. Soldiers before impact. Surgeons before the first cut. What kind of masking? Mirar asked. Gravitic baffles, the officer said. Thermal suppression. They're trying to look like debris. Mirar let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but had no humor in it. Of course they are. Relk's voice stayed controlled. You recognize this tactic? I recognize the intent, Mirar said, and looked up at him. Nobody comes into a system that way to say hello. Relk did not disagree. But what struck him most was not the fleet's stealth. It was the fact that the humans had detected it first. Their warning ping had arrived on Imperial channels, simple, direct, unencrypted. Unknown contacts at system edge, requesting joint assessment, not pleading, not panicking. As if they had been waiting for this day, and merely confirming the hour. Relk turned to the tactical projection. The contacts were still smeared, still half-shadowed, but their spacing betrayed purpose. Estimate numbers? He asked. The officer's tendrils trembled. At least 80 hulls. Possibly more. Mirar's lips pressed together. 80 warships was not an apocalypse for the Empire. For humanity. Still bound to one star and a handful of colonies. It was a storm that could strip their world to bone. Relk watched Mara's hands. She was clenching and unclenching her fingers like a ritual. Is this common? He asked her softly, almost against protocol. Mara's answer came after a pause. No, then. After another pause, quieter. But we always assumed it would happen eventually, in the days before the unknown fleet closed in. The Empire learned more about humanity than it had intended. The official First Contact program expanded rapidly, because humans expanded it. They invited the Imperial delegation into their libraries, their museums, their memory vaults. They showed them a species that had crawled from mud into orbit, in a blink of cosmic time, but the humans did not present their history like a triumph. They presented it like a confession. Relk spent an entire night, an Imperial night measured by ship cycles, watching human archival footage projected on a wall of light. It began with crude images, black and white wood trenches, gas masks, limbs torn away by metal. Then it escalated. Cities reduced to ash by nuclear fire. Human bodies turned to shadows on stone. A cultural analyst beside him whispered, disturbed, why would they show us this? Relk answered without looking away. Because they believe it matters that we see what they are capable of doing to themselves. And you think it does? Relk's crest lowered slightly. I think it matters very much. Humans had committed atrocities that would have triggered Imperial extermination protocols for other species. They had also rebuilt from those atrocities with a stubbornness that bordered on the irrational. They fought wars and then wrote treaties. They invented weapons and then invented laws to restrain them. They shattered their world and then learned to heal it. Their contradictions weren't flaws, they were systems of balance. Like a star that burned because gravity and fusion waged permanent compromise. And beneath it all, in every archive, every story, every memorial, Relk found the same recurring human theme. We did terrible things. We survived them. We must not do them again. But he also found a quieter subtext. The one humans did not say aloud, if we must, we will. The Galactic Empire itself had been forged in a different philosophy. Relk had been born in the Echo Dominion. A crystalline species evolved in caverns where sound was sight and vibration was language. When the Empire came, it did not ask for peace. It demanded order. The Echo Dominion resisted. Their sonic weapons fractured Imperial armor and shattered the lungs of invaders. The Empire responded with patience. It did not crush them in a day. It starved their moons. It cut trade routes. It offered surrender with one tendril and held annihilation in the other. Relk's ancestors capitulated, not because they were weak, but because the Empire made resistance meaningless. That was how the Empire operated, not with rage, but with inevitability. The Strategic Council's doctrine, the weight of stars, was simple. In a galaxy of countless civilizations, the only stable peace was one enforced by a single authority. Conquest was framed as mercy, assimilation as salvation. Those who joined were protected. Those who resisted were erased. Relk had believed in that doctrine for most of his life, until he met humans. Humans did not behave like a conquered species, waiting to be conquered. They behaved like a species that had already stared down extinction and decided the universe would not scare them into submission. Not because they were fearless, because they were exhausted of fear. High Arbiter Zelva, back in the Imperial core, did what he had never done before. He invited dissent into the council chamber. The Empire's political structure was layered like an armored shell. At the top, the Emperor now dead, replaced by an interim throne, while succession rights dragged on. Beneath that, the Strategic Council, where Zelva ruled as arbiter, and beneath them, the Ministries war, trade, assimilation, science, records. Zelva summoned the ministers and projected Earth above the circular table. Humanity remains classified under absolute non-engagement, he said. And now an unknown fleet approaches their system. We must decide whether to intervene, observe, or withdraw. The Minister of War, a scarred being of iron-boned physiology from the Karek Forge worlds, snorted. Why is this even debated? They are primitives. Their world is unclaimed. Let the unknown fleet take them. We lose nothing. The Minister of Trade clicked its mandibles. If we allow an external power to establish itself in Sol, we create a foothold near our frontier. That is suboptimal. The Minister of Assimilation, draped in ceremonial filaments, spoke carefully. First contact protocols were not designed for abandonment. If humans are destroyed after we arrive, it will reflect weakness. Silver listened to them all, then he asked the question that ended the room's certainty. What if the non-engagement directive exists not to protect humans from us, but to protect us from humans? Silence. The Minister of War laughed once, harsh. They can barely leave their system. Silver's tendrils tightened. They do not need to leave their system to harm us, he said. A cornered species can become a weapon. Even unintentionally, the Minister of Science shifted uneasily. We have limited data. Only one automated defense incident, Silver interrupted, in which 27 radar vessels ceased to exist. No one laughed again. The Arbiter leaned forward. The late Emperor erased the records himself. He feared something enough to break every archival law. I will not ignore that. The Minister of War's eyes narrowed. Then we should strike first. Silver's voice became colder. That, he said, is exactly what the Emperor forbade on Earth. The human response to the approaching fleet was strange. Relk expected panic, mobilization, chaos, the frantic disarray of a species caught unprepared. Instead, the United Earth Coordination Council met in a chamber built beneath a mountain, surrounded by old flags and newer, cleaner symbols. An uneasy coalition of nations bound by necessity. Relk attended. Standing behind the Imperial ambassador in formal posture, the human representatives were tired, but not surprised. A woman in a dark suit spoke first. We're confirming incoming contacts. Their approach vector suggests hostile intent. We have no identification. A man with military insignia tapped the table. They're coming masked. That means they think we can see them. That means they think we can fight. Relk watched the exchange. There was fear in them, yes. But it was contained, stored behind routines and procedure like pressure behind a dam. Moravan stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, face unreadable. The council leader, the older man Relk had met earlier, looked toward the Imperial ambassador. Will the Empire help? He asked. The ambassador chose diplomacy. We are evaluating the situation. The human leader nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. You don't owe us anything. We just met. Then he added, almost conversationally. But if you leave, and they come for us, please remember you were here when we asked. Relk felt something in his gut twist. Not accusation, just a marker set into history. After the meeting, Relk followed Mara into a hallway lit by soft white panels. The air smelled faintly of metal and human antiseptics. Your people aren't reacting like prey. Relk said. Mara stopped, turned, and studied him. We're not prey, she replied. Relk held her gaze. You have limited fleet assets. Your colonies are young. Your industrial capacity is impressive for your stage, but not enough to face 80 warships. Mara's eyes softened slightly, not in amusement, but in something like pity. You're thinking in terms of fleets, she said. So are they. Relk's crest flickered. And you are not? Mara hesitated. Then she said quietly, Commander, do you know what we did the first time we realized the universe might not be empty? Relk remained silent. We didn't build a grand armada, Mara said. We didn't build an empire. We didn't even build alliances. Because we didn't know who was out there. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. We built dead man switches. Relk's tendrils stilled. Explain. Mara's jaw tightened. And for the first time Relk saw something raw under her professional mask, an old fear. Ancient and inherited, like a scar passed down in blood. We looked at our own history, she said, and we assumed whoever came would be like us at our worst. Relk's voice was careful. So you prepared to die? Mara shook her head. No, she whispered. We prepared to make sure nobody else lived if we did. Relk felt cold. He had served in border pacifications. He had watched civilizations collapse under the Empire's weight. But this was different. This was not conquest. This was nihilistic deterrence, born from a species that had once almost annihilated itself and decided, never again unless forced. Relk swallowed, an involuntary motion in his physiology. What did you build? Mara looked away down the corridor, as if seeing something far beyond the mountain walls. We built things we swore we'd never use, she said. And we hid them so well we almost forgot they existed. Relk's crest lowered. Almost forgot. Almost. Out beyond Neptune, the unknown fleet crossed the threshold where the sun's gravity tightened its grip. The harmony of Law's sensors sharpened as distance closed. The smears became shapes, angular holes, black composites, aesthetic of predation ships designed to intimidate, to look like knives and talons. Their formation was not imperial. No imperial fleet flew like that, too chaotic, too aggressively spaced, as if each vessel wanted to lunge first. A new signal broke across the channel, not a greeting. A demand, translated by Imperial Systems. Sol System. This star is claimed by the Sable Chain. Submit your planet for levy and bondage. Resistance will be harvested. The human liaison officers in the Harmonist Bay reacted with visible anger. Some with fear. One with laughter so sharp it sounded like it hurt. Maravan stepped forward and spoke into the channel before anyone stopped her. "This is Earth," she said, voice calm. "You're trespassing." A pause, then a reply, dripping with contempt. "Earth, you are small. You are alone. You will be used." Mara didn't flinch. "You picked the wrong system," she said. "Turn around." Relk's eyes widened slightly. She was provoking them, or perhaps she wasn't. Perhaps she truly believed it. The Sable Chain responded with a single act. One ship detached from the fleet, accelerated, and fired a beam toward the outermost human listening post, an unmanned station floating in the dark. The beam lanced through it. The station vaporized. In silent light, the human officers gasped. Relk watched Mara's face. She did not look shocked. She looked like someone watching a clock finally strike the hour they dreaded. She turned to Relk. "Commander," she said, voice low. "You asked what the difference was between defense and survival." Relk said nothing. Mara's eyes were wet now, but her voice did not break. "Welcome," she whispered, "to the part of our history we don't put in museums." The alarm systems began to wail, and on the tactical projection, inside Earth's orbit, the millions of debris fragments that had once drifted lazily in silent arcs began to shift, not randomly, not panicked, with purpose. As if the entire planet had taken a breath. The first movement was so small that only machines noticed. A satellite adjusted its orbit by 3 meters, then another, then a fragment of metal, no larger than a human hand, rotated 90 degrees and fired a micro-thruster that had not activated in 32 years. On the tactical display aboard the Harmony of Law, the orbital layer around Earth began to shimmer, not visually, but mathematically. Vectors shifted, velocities aligned, millions of objects altered, course by fractions so precise they resembled a living system adjusting its muscles. "Commander." Relk stared at the data. "This is not a defense grid," he murmured. The Imperial Systems officer ran probability analysis. The results appeared in a column that kept growing longer. Distributed kinetic network, self-organizing architecture, autonomous threat response lattice, activation level, escalating. Captain Maravan stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the same display. "We call it the Halo," she said quietly. Relk did not look away from the numbers. "How long has it existed?" "The first pieces went up about a century ago," she replied. "Back when we thought space junk was a problem." Relk's crest flickered. "You are telling me this began as waste management?" Mara gave a tired smile. "We never throw anything away," she said. "We just wait until we need it." Out beyond Neptune, the Sable Chain fleet continued its advance. Their ships were efficient predators, long hulls built around heavy forward weapon arrays, shield projectors layered like armor plates. Their doctrine favored intimidation and speed. Strike hard, break resistance quickly, harvest survivors. They did not slow for negotiations. The destroyed listening post had been their announcement. The next target would be closer, on Earth. The United Coordination Council authorized system defense condition. Gray. Not red. Not yet. Red meant last measures. Gray meant prepare everything quietly, across the planet. Changes began that most civilians never noticed. Energy grids shifted into wartime redundancy. Factories altered production. Priorities. Cargo ships already in orbit received new flight paths. Communication networks open secure. Channels that had never been used outside simulations. And deep beneath mountains, under oceans, inside sealed vaults older than most nations, systems that had been powered but dormant for decades began to wake. Humanity did not panic. It rehearsed. Relk was granted access to a restricted observation facility on Earth, one of the human preparedness centers. Though the name sounded almost harmless, the facility lay beneath a desert, carved into rock and shielded by layers of alloy and electromagnetic damping. Inside, it felt less like a command center and more like a museum of fears humanity had once imagined, except none of them were hypothetical anymore. Mara walked beside him through corridors lined with old warning symbols. "You keep weapons underground?" Relk asked. "Some," she said. They entered a chamber dominated by a spherical projection of Earth and its surrounding space. Data flowed across it in layered shells. Atmosphere, low orbit, high orbit, cislunar space, and beyond that fainter but growing the incoming Sable Chain fleet. A human officer approached Mara. Outer fleet crossed Uranus orbit. 38 hours to Mars perimeter, Mara nodded. Any change in formation? No, they're spreading slightly. Probably expecting resistance around Earth, Relk spoke. Your fleet assets remain minimal. You cannot match them ship for ship. The officer looked at him. Then at Mara. Mara answered. We're not planning to. Relk felt that cold sensation again. The Empire's position became increasingly uncomfortable. High Arbiter. Selva watched the Sol system feed in the council chamber. Imperial observers had been authorized to remain, but no reinforcements had been dispatched. The Minister of War spoke bluntly. If the Sable Chain takes Earth, we eliminate to uncertainties. A rival power loses ships in the assault, and the human anomaly resolves itself, the Minister of Trade countered. If humans possess hidden capabilities, and we abandon them, they will remember, the Minister of Assimilation added quietly. Humans place great value on loyalty and betrayal. Cultural analysis suggests memory of abandonment could complicate future integration. Selva listened, but his attention was fixed on a secondary feed. It showed orbital density metrics around Earth. The numbers were rising exponentially. Explain this, he said. The Science Ministry responded, voice uneasy. Humans are redirecting material from multiple sources. Decommissioned stations, industrial platforms. Lunar mass drivers are launching additional payloads. Payloads of what? Anything dense, the scientist admitted. Rock, metal, structural waste, refined alloys. They are increasing orbital mass, the Minister of War frowned. For shields. The scientist hesitated. No, they said. For momentum. Silence spread across the chamber. Selva spoke slowly. They are turning their entire orbital environment into ammunition. Inside the Sol system, the Sable Chain launched its second demonstration. A small human mining platform orbiting Mars received a targeting lock. The beam struck. The station broke apart in a burst of molten fragments. The Sable Chain broadcast immediately afterward. Submit your primary world. Further assets will be erased at intervals until compliance on Earth. The council chamber remained silent for several seconds. Then the leader, the same tired-eyed man, spoke. Status of Mars personnel? An aide replied. Evacuated 2 days ago, sir. The leader nodded once. Good. Then he turned to the military representative. Condition. Still grey. The leader closed his eyes briefly. Prepare for black. Around the table, several people inhaled sharply. Black meant something far beyond planetary defense. It meant humanity was preparing for outcomes where Earth itself might not survive. Commander. Relk was present when the notification came through the joint channel. Earth defense condition. Black. He turned to Mara. What does that mean? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she brought up a new layer on the system projection. At first, Relk saw nothing unusual. Then the deep space sensor network highlighted dozens of faint objects beyond the asteroid belt. Cold. Dark. Drifting. NO transponders. NO active emissions. Relk's crest rose slowly. Those are not natural, he said. Mara nodded. We put them there a long time ago, she said. What are they? She hesitated. Insurance. Relk's voice dropped. Against what? Mara looked at him. Against losing. The Sable Chain fleet reached the orbit of Jupiter. Their formation expanded now, deploying forward elements. Fighter swarms launched like clouds of insects. Sensor beams swept ahead, mapping defenses. They found the halo, and they underestimated it. The chain commander issued a standard opening maneuver. A long-range missile barrage designed to clear orbital clutter and blind local sensors before the main fleet advanced. Hundreds of warheads accelerated toward Earth's orbital shell on the harmony of law. Imperial officers leaned forward. This would be the first true test of human defenses. The missiles entered the halo layer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the debris moved. Not randomly. Not defensively. It surged. Millions of fragments accelerated along calculated paths, forming dense interception corridors. Warheads collided with metal at relativistic closing speeds. The result was not a single explosion. It was a storm, chain reactions of impacts. Detonations. Electromagnetic pulses rippling outward in expanding shells. Within 30 seconds, the entire missile wave ceased to exist. The halo did not disperse afterward. It tightened, reshaped like a fist. Relk stared at the projection. That response time. The systems officer whispered, "No central command." Mara nodded. "Distributed AI," she said. "No single point of failure." Relk's voice was quiet. "You built a planetary nervous system." Mara didn't deny it, but the Sable Chain learned quickly. Their next move was not missiles. It was gravity. 3 of their heavy cruisers adjusted position and fired synchronized gravitic distorters. Mass effect weapons designed to destabilize orbital environments. The halo shuddered. Fragments drifted out of alignment. Relk felt a flash of concern. Then the human system did something unexpected. Instead of resisting the distortion, it used it. The displaced fragments accelerated along the altered vectors, slingshotting outward, straight toward the forward chain. Cruisers. Thousands of impacts struck the nearest vessel before its shields could compensate. The cruiser's bow crumpled. Its formation broke. It drifted, venting atmosphere. The halo returned to equilibrium on the human command floor. No one cheered. They just kept working. Relk realized something. Then humans were not reacting emotionally to the battle. They were reacting procedurally, like surgeons operating on a patient that happened to be their own planet. He turned to Mara. "You expected this?" She nodded. "We expect everything," she said. Her voice was flat. Then she added quietly, "That's the problem with being scared for a few thousand years. You get really good at imagining worst-case scenarios." Relk looked back at the display. The Sable Chain fleet was slowing. Now, reforming, reassessing, and then the tactical projection updated again. New objects were accelerating inward from deep space. Dozens of them, cold, silent, on collision courses. Relk's voice tightened. "The insurance," Mara swallowed. "Yes." The first of the objects ignited its engines, and the energy output spiked high enough to trigger Imperial threat alerts. Relk stared. "These are not mines," he said. Mara shook her head. "No," she whispered. "There's something worse. Out beyond the asteroid belt, one of humanity's long-hidden constructs unfolded. Its outer shell split, radiators deployed like black wings. A reactor core flared to life, and then the object accelerated toward the incoming fleet, not at attack speed, at intercept speed, on a trajectory that would carry it straight through the densest part of the Sable Chain formation. Relk's voice was barely audible. "What is its purpose?" Mara answered, her eyes fixed on the projected path. "It's called a breaker," she said. He waited. Her next words came slowly. "We built them in case someone ever brought a fleet we couldn't stop." Relk's crest flattened. "And what do they do?" Mara didn't look at him. "They make sure there isn't a fleet anymore." On the tactical display, 5 more breakers ignited. The Sable Chain commander began issuing emergency dispersal orders, but the breakers were already accelerating, and their trajectories were converging. Relk finally understood what Emtrakadal had meant. Humans did not prepare to and was they prepared to end them for everyone. The breakers' reactor outputs crossed a threshold that Imperial systems classified as stellar event equivalent. The first detonation countdown appeared, and on Earth, the defense condition changed from black to absolute.
The moment the first breaker crossed the stellar event threshold, every sensor in the Sol system screamed. On the harmony of law, warning glyphs cascaded across the tactical displays in violent amber spirals. Imperial classification systems struggled to categorize what they were seeing. Reactor signatures of that magnitude were normally associated with planetary power grids or capital-class starforges. This was neither. Commander Relk stood motionless as the projected trajectory sharpened. The breaker was not slowing. It was not maneuvering to engage. It was accelerating toward the densest cluster of the Sable Chain fleet. And it was not designed to survive the encounter. The Imperial Systems officer's voice wavered. "Energy curve indicates unstable containment." Relk spoke quietly. "It is not unstable." He swallowed. "It is intentional." Out near Jupiter's orbit, the Sable Chain commander finally understood the threat. Their formations shattered into emergency dispersal patterns. Heavy cruisers rotated, shields overloading as they attempted to bring long-range weapons to bear. The first volley struck the leading breaker. Beams carved glowing trenches across its armored shell. Missiles detonated against it in expanding fire blossoms. The construct did not evade. It did not defend. It simply continued accelerating, because it did not need to survive. It only needed to arrive. On Earth, inside the underground command complex, the atmosphere had changed. No alarms, no shouting. Just the heavy silence of people executing a plan they had prayed would never be used. Captain Mara Vance stood beside the central projection as countdown telemetry streamed past. One of the younger officers finally spoke, voice tight. "Ma'am, if those go off inside their formation..." Mara nodded. "Yes." The officer swallowed. "That's equivalent to..." "I know what it's equivalent to," Mara said softly. The room fell silent again, because everyone understood the unspoken part. If the breakers detonated too close to the wrong trajectory, the electromagnetic shockwave, radiation burst, and gravitational shear could cascade inward, toward the inner system, toward Mars, toward Earth. These were not precision weapons. They were existential ones. On the Imperial core, High Arbiter Zelvar leaned forward as the live feed expanded. The Science Ministry's analysis ran in parallel. Projected yield, catastrophic. Effective range, multi-thousand kilometers per detonation. Fleet survivability, probability Sable chain, below 18%. The Minister of War spoke first. "They are willing to detonate stellar-level devices inside their own system." The Minister of Trade's voice was thin. "Collateral projections." The Science Ministry hesitated. "Significant risk to their own infrastructure. Possible planetary-level technological collapse." Silence. Zelvar whispered the conclusion. "They are willing to cripple themselves, to destroy the attacker." No one disagreed. Back near Jupiter, the first breaker entered terminal phase. Its outer shell peeled away in layers, exposing a dense core surrounded by field generators operating far beyond standard safety limits. The Sable Chain commander made the only rational decision. Full retreat, but retreat takes time. And time was the one resource the breakers did not need. Countdown reached 0. For a single instant, the breaker became the brightest object in the system. Then space itself seemed to fold. The detonation was not a simple explosion. It was a controlled release of contained stellar plasma and gravitational compression fields. A brief artificial microflare erupted in vacuum, followed by a violent expansion of charged particles and kinetic shock. 3 Sable Chain cruisers disappeared instantly. 2 more broke apart as their shields failed. Fighter swarms simply ceased to exist. The shockwave rolled outward like an invisible tide. On the Harmony of Law, emergency dampeners activated automatically. Relk gripped the console. Impact radius? Expanding. Expanding. Secondary debris forming. Fleet cohesion collapsing. But the breakers were not done. 5 more converged. Inside the Sable Chain command vessel, panic replaced doctrine. Their formation dissolved completely as ships attempted random, evasive vectors. But the breakers were not targeting ships. They were targeting space. Each one detonated where the fleet density was highest. The second detonation tore a carrier in half. The third ignited stored munitions across multiple vessels, creating a chain reaction of internal explosions. The fourth and fifth overlapped their shock fronts. Sensors on every human and Imperial platform went blind for several seconds. When vision returned, the Sable Chain fleet was no longer a formation. It was wreckage, burning, drifting, dying. In the Earth Command Center, no one celebrated. An officer finally spoke, remaining hostile contacts. 12 major holes. Multiple crippled. Mara nodded once. "Continue pressure." Halo Phase 2. The projection shifted. The orbital debris network reconfigured again. But this time, it was not forming a shield. It was forming trajectories. Millions of fragments accelerated outward in coordinated streams, not random, not chaotic. Targeted, the Halo had become a planetary railgun. Commander Relk watched the streams fan outward toward the broken Sable Chain survivors. "This is extermination," one Imperial officer whispered. Relk shook his head slowly. "Ah, no," he pointed. Several damaged enemy vessels were not being targeted. Escape vectors were left open. They're giving them a way out. The Sable Chain commander understood that too. A new transmission burst across the system. "Cease attack. Withdrawal initiated." On Earth, the Council received it. The leader looked around the room. Verification? Enemy ships? Changing vector? Leaving system? Silence. Then he asked the question no one wanted to answer. Probability they return with reinforcements. No one spoke, because everyone knew the answer. High. Very high. The leader closed his eyes. Then we send the message. Across the Sol system. Every transmitter activated. Human, Imperial, civilian, military. A single broadcast went out. Directed at the retreating fleet and boosted toward deep space. Mara Vance delivered it. Her voice was steady. This is Earth. A pause. We do not seek territory. We do not seek war. We do not expand. The damaged sable-chained ships continued fleeing. Her voice hardened. But if you come here to take our world... She looked at the projection of the breaker debris field. We will destroy everything you bring. Another pause. Then the line that would enter Imperial strategic doctrine for centuries. And if that isn't enough, we will destroy the system before we let you have it. Transmission ended. On the Imperial core, the council chamber remained silent long after the message finished. The Minister of War spoke first. They threatened stellar denial. The Science Ministry confirmed quietly. They have the capacity. The breaker design could be scaled. Zelvar did not speak for several moments. Then he opened the recovered archive from Emperor Carthal again. This time he found a second recording. The Emperor's voice was older, quieter. I did not forbid conquest of Earth because they could defeat us. A pause. I forbade it because if we tried, another pause, they would make victory meaningless. In the Sol system, the last of the sable-chained ships crossed the outer boundary. Their fleet, once 80 strong, was now less than 20. They did not stop. They did not respond. Fled. But as Imperial long-range sensors tracked their retreat, something else appeared beyond them. Faint. Distant. Multiple signatures. Many more than 80. Commander Relk stared at the expanding contact list. His crest slowly flattened. They already called for help, he whispered. Mara looked at the same data. Her shoulders sank not in fear. In recognition, of course they did, she said. Because humanity had just demonstrated something to the galaxy. Not strength, not dominance, but a willingness to burn the sky rather than surrender. And now, the galaxy was coming to see if the threat was real.
The new contacts appeared slowly at first. 1, then 3, then 12. Then the sensor board stopped updating in manageable numbers and simply began expanding the tactical scale outward on the main display of the harmony of law. The outer darkness of the Sol system filled with faint signatures, warp wakes cooling, gravitic shadows stabilizing, energy profiles rising from stealth to operational levels. Commander Relk did not speak for several seconds. Then he asked the question every Imperial officer was already calculating. Total count. The systems officer swallowed. Initial estimate, 240 vessels. Silence, composition, mixed. Multiple power signatures. At least 3 independent factions. Possibly more. Relk understood immediately. The Sable Chain had not just called for reinforcements. They had called for opportunity. The galaxy had seen the broadcast. A single system species had just demonstrated system-scale weapons and had threatened to destroy its own star rather than surrender to some powers. That was terrifying. To others, it was a challenge. On Earth, the new sensor data reached the United Coordination Council within minutes. This time, the room did not remain calm because everyone understood the difference between 80 ships and 140. The military advisor spoke first. Those aren't reinforcements. That's a convergence. The science representative added quietly. Signal analysis suggests multiple languages, multiple command structures. The council leader leaned back slowly. They're not coming to invade, he said. The room waited. They're coming to test us. Captain Mara Vance stood again in the underground command center, staring at the growing swarm on the outer system projection. Her hands were steady. Her voice was not. How many breakers remain operational? The operations officer answered. 17 intact, 9 damaged. Production capacity limited. Reactor materials are the bottleneck. Stellar options? The room hesitated. Then the chief systems engineer answered carefully. Primary star contingency remains. Functional. Relk, standing behind the Imperial delegation, turned slowly. Primary star contingency, he repeated. Mara did not look at him. We hoped we'd never need to talk about that in front of anyone else, she said. Relk's voice was quiet. You prepared a method to destroy your own sun. Rara closed her eyes. Yes, in the Imperial core. High Arbiter Zelva was already speaking. Immediate priority directive, he said to the Council. All Imperial forces within 5 sectors are to hold position. No approach to Sol without Council authorization. The Minister of War looked stunned. You are isolating the system. I am preventing escalation. Zelva replied. The Minister leaned forward. If multiple hostile coalitions engage and humans activate stellar denial. Yes, Zelva said. The chamber went silent, because everyone understood what stellar denial meant, not just Earth, not just humanity. A superheated star destabilization event in that region would damage hyperspace lanes, trade corridors, and possibly trigger cascading gravitational disturbances across neighboring sectors. A single desperate species could burn a hole in the Empire's frontier. Zelva spoke quietly. We are no longer observing a primitive civilization. He looked at the projection of Sol. We are observing a dead man species. Out beyond the orbit of Neptune, the arriving fleets did not immediately attack. They formed a loose perimeter, different formations, different doctrines, different threat postures. One faction broadcast first. Earth, you have demonstrated unusual defensive capability. Surrender your strategic technology for inspection. Another faction transmitted seconds later. System claim under review. Comply and avoid termination. A third did not speak at all. Its ships simply advanced 5% closer, probing, measuring, testing reaction time. On Earth, the Council leader listened to the overlapping demands, then he asked the question that mattered most. How long until they realize we can't fight all of them at once? No one answered, because they already had. Mara stood beside Relk on the observation deck of the Harmony of Law. For the first time since the crisis began, her composure cracked. We can't win this, she said. Relk did not respond immediately. You never intended to win, he said finally. She gave a weak, humorless laugh. Yeah, but there's a difference between losing and this. She gestured toward the outer system display, now crowded with hostile signatures. Relk studied her. You are deciding whether to escalate to stellar denial. Mara's silence was answer enough. After a moment, she whispered, we built it as a deterrent, a nightmare scenario, something no one would ever believe we'd actually use. Relk looked at the data. They believe you will. Mara nodded. That's the problem. So do we. Inside Earth's deepest strategic facility, the primary star contingency was activated for the first time outside simulation. The system had no official name. Internally, engineers called it Prometheus. It was not a bomb. It was not a weapon. It was a process. Over decades, humanity had placed a network of gravitational resonance devices inside solar orbit, tiny compared to the Sun, but precisely positioned. If activated in sequence, they would introduce oscillations into the star's core equilibrium. Not enough to destroy the Sun instantly, but enough to destabilize it. Solar output would spike unpredictably. Radiation storms would sterilize inner planets. Orbital mechanics would become chaotic. The solar system would become uninhabitable. And any fleet inside it would die slowly, trapped in a collapsing stellar environment. Prometheus was not a last strike. It was a suicide trap for an entire solar system. Commander Relk received the briefing in stunned silence. You would destroy your own civilization, he said. The human engineer replied calmly. If the alternative is slavery, extinction, or planetary harvest. Yes. Relk's crest flattened. And the billions of civilians? The engineer's eyes were tired. They were the ones who voted to build it. Relk had studied many species. He had never encountered one that democratically approved its own doomsday option. The outer fleets moved closer incrementally, testing, pressuring. One faction fired a low-power strike at a distant asteroid station. The halo reacted instantly. The breakers shifted position. Prometheus entered Phase 2 readiness. On Earth, evacuation protocols began not because evacuation was possible, but because procedure demanded people be given something to do. Mara stood beside the main console as the council leader entered. He looked older than he had hours before. How close are they? He asked. Out of weapons range in 6 hours, an officer replied. The leader nodded slowly. Then we send the final message. The transmission went out on every frequency, every language the human database could translate, and several mathematical frameworks beyond language. Mara delivered it. This is Earth. Her voice was calm. We are a single system species. We are not a threat to your territory. We do not expand. The fleets continued advancing. She continued, but we will not surrender our world. She paused. If you enter attack range, we will activate stellar destabilization protocols. That made several formations hesitate. She finished. You will not conquer the system. A final pause. You will die here with us. Transmission ended. For 23 minutes, nothing happened. Then the first fleet slowed. Then the second, then the silent faction reversed vector. Within 40 minutes, every hostile formation began pulling back, not retreating in panic, withdrawing, because the calculation had finally completed. Earth was not worth the risk, not because humans were powerful, because humans were willing to make victory impossible. On the harmony of law, Imperial officers watched the retreat in stunned silence. Relk exhaled slowly. They didn't defeat them. One officer said. Relk shook his head. No, he replied. They convinced them the war had no survivors beside him. Marah finally sat down. Her hands were shaking now. The tension was gone. The fear was still there, but the worst had passed. Relk looked at her. You saved your world, he said. Marah stared at the retreating fleets. No, she whispered. We reminded the galaxy why no one should try to take it. In the Imperial core, High Arbiter Silver issued a new directive. Not non-engagement, not isolation. A new classification, Sol System, Strategic Exclusion Zone Humanity. Civilization-level deterrent species, the Minister of War asked quietly. So the Empire will never invade? Silver answered without hesitation. Not unless we are prepared to lose the war, even if we win. But as the last hostile fleet exited the Sol System, one final signal was detected. A long-range transmission, not a threat, not a demand. A simple message, broadcast across multiple trade networks and military channels throughout the region. Notice to all powers. The Sol System is under human control. Interference risk. Total loss within weeks. The message spread across half the spiral arm, and the legend began. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the most advanced. They did not rule territory. They did not build empires, but they were the only species in the galaxy that would burn their own sun rather than surrender, and that made them untouchable. The galaxy did not change overnight. Empires did not collapse. Trade routes did not shift immediately. Borders did not redraw themselves across star charts in sudden strokes. But something quieter moved through the spiral arms. Something more dangerous than war. Reputation. Within 3 standard cycles, the Sol System disappeared from strategic planning documents across dozens of powers in the Sable Chain's territory. Internal directives classified Sol as high-cost target non-viable. In the mercantile leagues, insurance algorithms assigned the region a unique risk category. System-level escalation probability. Extreme. Even opportunistic raider guilds began avoiding navigation vectors that pass within 3 light-years of Sol, because the lesson of the Breakers and the Prometheus broadcast had been understood clearly. Earth was not defended by fleets. It was defended by the willingness to make any victory catastrophic, and in a galaxy driven by profit, expansion, and survival. Nothing was more frightening than a species that had already accepted the possibility of its own end. On Earth, there were no celebrations, no victory parades, no declarations of triumph, because nothing had been won. The Breakers had damaged infrastructure across the outer system. Several colonies required evacuation. Orbital manufacturing capacity had been reduced by nearly 30%, and Prometheus, humanity's darkest insurance, had come within 2 authorization steps of activation. The knowledge of that fact spread slowly. And it changed people, in cities, in universities, in quiet homes where the night sky looked the same as it always had. There was a new understanding. The stars were not empty, and survival was no longer theoretical. Commander Relk stood on the observation balcony of the human orbital station Unity Array, watching Earth rotate below, blue, white, fragile. The planet did not look like the center of a strategic exclusion zone. It looked like a world that could be broken by a single well-placed strike. Captain Marah Vance joined him. You are leaving soon, she said. Yes, Relk hesitated. Before I go, I must ask a question. Marah leaned against the railing. Go ahead. Relk studied the planet. Why did you show us Prometheus? Marah didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet, because if the Empire didn't understand what we're capable of, someday you might test us. Relk nodded slowly. That is logical. She looked at him.
And because we didn't want to lie. Relk turned. Why does that matter?
Mirah's eyes reflected the curve of the world below. Because if the galaxy thinks we're monsters, eventually they'll treat us like monsters. A pause. We're dangerous, she admitted. But we don't want to be feared.
We want people to know why we're dangerous. Relk considered that. Fear without understanding leads to preemptive war, he said. Mirah nodded. Exactly, in the Imperial Core.
High Arbiter Zelva convened the Strategic Council for the final Sol review. The chamber was quieter than usual. The Minister of War spoke first. Assessment. Humanity is not expansionist.
They do not project force beyond their system, the Minister of Trade added. They have opened limited economic channels.
Technology exchange proposals are unusually transparent. The Minister of Assimilation tilted its filaments. They do not seek membership. Zelva asked the obvious question. Do they fear us?
The Cultural Analysis Division answered. No, Arbiter. A pause. They fear becoming us. Silence settled over the chamber, because that answer explained everything.
The final Imperial classification was entered into permanent record. Humanity status. Independent civilization expansion behavior. Minimal aggression threshold. High when threatened deterrence profile. Existential strategic recommendation. Respect boundaries below it. A secondary note was added by Zelva himself. This species does not seek power.
It seeks survival. Do not force it to choose between the two. The years that followed revealed something unexpected. Humanity did not militarize further.
They did not build fleets to dominate nearby systems. They did not turn their exclusion zone into a fortress empire. Instead, they began offering something else. Aid when a mining disaster crippled a neighboring independent colony. Human emergency vessels arrived first, when a plague spread through a fringe trade network. Human medical ships deployed without demanding tribute, when a minor powers reactor failure threatened a populated moon. Human engineers transmitted repair schematics freely.
Across the region, a strange pattern emerged. Humans would not conquer, they would not threaten, but they would help. Even species that had once considered attacking Sol began to reassess, because there was a second message hidden beneath the first. Humanity would burn its own sun before surrender, but it would also cross
the void to save strangers it owed nothing. Commander Relk returned to Earth 3 cycles later as part of a formal Imperial diplomatic mission. The welcome ceremony was modest. No military displays.
No strategic posturing, just representatives from dozens of human nations and a small plaque installed near the landing site. It read, "We survived because we prepared for the worst. We thrive because we choose something better." Relk stood before it for a long time. Mirah joined him again. "You're thinking about Prometheus," she said. "Yes," Relk hesitated. "In the Empire, ultimate deterrence is based on overwhelming strength." Mirah nodded. "For you, it is based on mutual destruction." She nodded again. Relk looked at her.
"But your culture, your aid programs, your diplomacy."
"Those contradict that philosophy." Mirah smiled faintly. "They don't contradict it." She pointed at the plaque. "They balance it." High Arbiter Zelva never visited Earth, but he watched. He watched human ships move farther out not as war fleets, but as research vessels, medical carriers, construction platforms. He watched nearby systems begin trading with them voluntarily. He watched independent worlds quietly request human defensive consultation, and he realized something the Empire had never considered. Power did not always expand through conquest. Sometimes it spread through trust. A century later, Imperial cadets studying frontier strategy learned a simple lesson.
There were 3 kinds of civilizations: those you could conquer, those you had to negotiate with, and those you left alone. When instructors reached a Sol case study, they always ended with the same question: why does the Empire avoid Earth?
The official answer was short: because their deterrence is absolute. But the unofficial answer, the one passed quietly between officers who had studied the full archive, was different. The Empire did not avoid humanity because humans were the strongest. It avoided them because humans had learned a truth most civilizations never accepted. Survival was not about winning. It was about making sure no one could take everything away, and once a species built its entire philosophy around that truth,
it became something rare, something difficult, something dangerous.
Not an empire, not a threat, but a civilization that could not be ruled. On a quiet night over Earth, Commander Relk stood once more on the Unity Array observation deck, preparing to depart. Below him, the planet turned peacefully. No fleets, no alarms, no signs that it had once come within moments of destroying its own star. Mirah stood beside him one last time. Do you think the galaxy will ever stop being afraid of us?
She asked. Relk considered the question carefully. Then he answered. No, hurrah side, that's what I thought. Relk continued, but fear is not the only thing they feel. She looked at him. What else? Relk watched the blue world spin. Respect. A long silence passed between them. Then the Imperial shuttle detached from the station and began its slow journey away from the only world the Galactic Empire had ever decided
Was not worth touching.